Yo, what's up guys, this is Mike Troid, and today I'm coming at you with another deck profile here for TCG Pocket. Today's actually the release event that has given us Promo Pack 2, and I'm really excited for this deck that you see up here. This is a deck that I call Sinister Song, and without further ado, let's go ahead and talk about it. So this is a tempo style deck that uses Wigglytuff and Weezing to spread status conditions to your opponent as quickly and efficiently as possible. And the reason that this deck is something that I'm covering now is because of the newly released Jigglypuff promo. This card is instrumental to this deck's success, and that's because it's currently the only basic in the entire game that can inflict the sleep condition, and it does it automatically. You don't even have to flip a coin. So if you start the game with this, especially going second, which means you get the first energy attachment, you could actually have a 50-50 chance of just completely deleting your opponent's next turn. They won't be able to attack or retreat. Now, if they're able to evolve the Pokemon that you put to sleep, that will get around the status condition, but outside of that, if you're against something like an Articuno or a Pikachu EX, then you can just completely blank their entire next turn, which is extremely powerful. So, looking at the list here, as I mentioned before, this is a tempo style deck, which means we're looking to play somewhat quickly as well as limit our opponent's options and just kind of beat them down through value. So the first Pokemon we're going to look at here is going to be Weezing. By this point, most people know what this card does. It's probably one of the best Pokemon in the entire game, and it's seen a lot of success paired with various different Pokemon. Here we have it with Wigglytuff EX, but the purpose of this card is to get off to a quick start. If you go first, that is usually a disadvantage in this game, but Weezing is excellent in that you can immediately evolve it on your second turn going first, and then use its Gas Leak ability as well as swing for 30 with Tackle. And it has the added benefit of being a Dark type, so into those Mewtwo matchups, which everyone dreads, you'll be able to hit them for weakness and actually put in some really good work with Weezing. Now, what's really cool is that the poison status condition actually stacks with sleep, which means that a sleeping Pokemon can also be poisoned. So while they're trapped there in the active, they'll be taking residual damage over time, which is what makes this particular pairing so effective. So, for those that don't know, Wigglytuff EX is a large EX attacker. For 3 energy, it does 80 damage and puts your opponent's active to sleep automatically. So similar to the Jigglypuff, it's basically a 50-50 chance of skipping your opponent's next turn. However, this also two-shots most things in the game, so if you do get lucky in that coin flip, you'll basically be able to knock out your opponent's active without receiving any kind of damage or repercussions yourself. So that's going to be our main attacker, but I do have one of the non-EX Wigglytuff in this deck. I think this is really important if you're going second, because you'll be able to use Jigglypuff on turn 1 to put something to sleep, and then assuming it doesn't evolve or wake up, then you can immediately evolve into this on your second turn, kind of similar to the Weezing play that I mentioned earlier, and apply pressure to your opponent by attaching a second energy and then swinging for 60. This is really, really good into a lot of Pokemon, Pikachu EX specifically as well, because it has 120 HP, so if you can put it to sleep and make it lose a turn, kind of trap it in the active, and then hit it for 60 twice, barring a potion, you'll just be able to cleanly take them out, which is a very strong exchange in your favor. On top of that, this Wigglytuff has 100 HP, which is a really important damage benchmark, because Pikachu will not be able to one-shot it, except if they play a Giovanni specifically. So making them have the Giovanni to take the knockout for a single point is really, really strong. So those are the main Pokemon in the deck. I'm going to skip down a bit here to Old Amber. Now, those of you that have seen my Gengar deck tech may remember the purpose of this card, but just to explain, basically most people are running fossils in their decks at this point because they've discovered that fossils are an excellent way to protect yourself against Sabrina early in the game. They give you a basic that you can put on your bench and put into the active against a Sabrina while protecting the Pokemon you actually care about, without damaging the consistency of your starts or with Pokeball. So we don't want to have an actual Pokemon in this slot that would potentially be our starter Pokemon for the game. We really want to start with either Jigglypuff or Coughing to apply those early status conditions, but the Old Amber is not something that you can lead with. You'll always get some other kind of basic Pokemon, and when you go to use Pokeball, this is not a basic Pokemon that will appear within the pool of basics that can be pulled from your deck. So you're always going to get to your Coughing and your Jigglypuff very consistently, while still having something on the bench to protect against Sabrina while you build up a Wigglytuff EX rather slowly. Now, what's really great about fossils is their ability to discard themselves from play. So later in the game, when you no longer need that protection against Sabrina, and this actually becomes a liability on your bench, you don't want your opponent to be able to Sabrina this for their last point of the game. So you can just discard it at that point, and it basically protects against Sabrina both in the early game and in the late game, which makes it an excellent tech card. Personally, in my experience playing this game for about a month now, I've found that 5 is kind of the magic number for Pokemon that you want in a deck. And these kind of decks that focus around 2 evolution lines really benefit from having a fossil as that like 5th basic Pokemon, so that you can kind of round out your bench and again just protect yourself from Sabrina a lot easier. Now, I do want to mention something small that I've noticed within the community, and that is a lot of people seem to run their fossil at random. They kind of just run whichever one they like the best, and that's totally fine, but I want to bring up this point that this deck that is running colorless and darkness Pokemon is going to be using basic darkness energy, and the purpose of running Old Amber specifically as opposed to Helix Fossil or Dome Fossil is that the Old Amber kind of bluffs that you might have an Aerodactyl in your deck. Aerodactyl is actually a very solid Pokemon in this game, and it uses colorless energy to attack. So rather than running a Helix Fossil, which evolves into Omastar, or a Dome Fossil, which evolves into Kabutops, I'm kind of bluffing, even though I don't actually have the Aerodactyl, that I might have it in my deck, and it's something that my opponent might have to consider. For example, if they're playing something like Dragonite or Venusaur, where they put all of their eggs into that one basket, Aerodactyl absolutely destroys decks like that, because if you flip heads on its attack, you shuffle that Pokemon into the deck, and they're basically going to lose on the spot. So, just something rather small. It's a little optimization, but I think if you, for example, are running like a water deck and you run a fossil in your deck, then you should run the Helix Fossil as an example, which will bluff that you might have the potential to play Omanite and Omastar. Even if you're not, it just makes your opponent consider those options and possibly play around them, even if they're not a potential for your deck. Alright, looking at the items and supporters, pretty standard stuff here. We have a couple of potion, 1 X speed in case you want to, for example, put a Weezing into the active position on turn 2 after you started with Jigglypuff, something like that. This deck doesn't do a lot of maneuvering through retreat, simply because Weezing requires 3 energy to retreat and the Wigglytuffs require 2. So I only run 1 X speed and 2 potions for healing. 2 Pokeballs, of course, standard, 2 Professor Oak. And then last but not least, we come here to the kind of tech supporters. Now, I personally found that 5 supporters is the magic number for this game. Any more than that, like 6, 7, 8, and your deck starts to get really clumpy because you can only play 1 supporter card at a time. So for example, if you play a Professor Oak and draw 2 cards and they're both supporter cards, in that turn you functionally draw nothing. So keeping the supporter lines trim, in my experience at least, has been very effective for ensuring that you can kind of play multiple cards per turn and actually get different things going, different lines of play. So speaking of different lines of play, we have 3 different tech supporters here. Giovanni is pretty self-explanatory. This is basically just for fixing numbers, scoring knockouts where you wouldn't otherwise, but also in this deck in particular, it can be very strong because it might fix your poison math from Weezing such that your opponent's Pokemon gets knocked out coming into your turn. That has always been really strong in the Pokemon TCG, is if your opponent can be knocked out by some kind of effect or status condition coming into your turn, because not only do you get the credit for that knockout, but you now then immediately get to attack the next thing your opponent promotes to the active position. So Giovanni can be really useful for creating that kind of situation. On top of that, we have 1 copy of Koga. I don't think 2 are necessary for this deck. You're not really trying to pivot Weezing in and out of battle like you would be in a dedicated dark deck, maybe with like Muck and Arbok. But I think having the 1 as an option in any kind of Weezing deck is very, very strong. A lot of times you can wall with Weezing early in the game while you set up your Wigglytuff, and then when you're ready, you can scoop Weezing out of the active with the Koga, after having put your opponent to, not to sleep, after you've poisoned them. and then you can promote the Wigglytuff and put them to sleep, which is kind of like the whole point of the deck. So that's a pretty strong combo. And then finally we run one Sabrina. Now Sabrina is kind of counterintuitive in this deck. A lot of times if your opponent's Pokemon is asleep or poisoned, you don't really want to play the Sabrina and force them out of the active position, because that will cure them of their status conditions. So this is more so just in here early in the game to stall, or late in the game when you're trying to take your last 1 or 2 points and clinch out the match that way. So I don't really think you need 2 of any of those particular supporters. I think running 1 of each and just giving yourselves a variety of options is going to be the way to go. So yeah, that's going to do it for this deck profile. I hope you guys enjoyed it and found it helpful and informative. And if you have any questions about it, feel free to ask in the comments below, and I'd be happy to answer them. Alrighty guys, take care, thanks for watching, and have a good one.